So imagine this, Captain Jack Sparrow, except with a medical degree. That is what we're talking about today, cruise ship doctors. My name is Kieran, I'm a junior doctor and a comedian, and today we're talking with my best friend, also called Kieran, who is a doctor in Australia, and we're talking all about being a doctor on a cruise ship. Kieran recently had an opportunity to sit down and talk with one of these doctors, an elusive fellow who's not going to be on the camera, but we've got all of the information from him to find out how you actually become a cruise ship doctor, why you might want to do it, some juicy info about how much they get paid and how much they get to travel. Let's get into it. Welcome to the channel, Kieran.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, isn't it? Because the pathways are normally really set out for doctors about how do they progress from their medical degree to their F1, their F2, then they go even to their training, then they consultant. Nobody really talks about all the different alternative pathways and things that are actually available if maybe you don't want to fit that rigid format. Yeah, I was lucky enough to sit down and speak to a cruise ship doctor who has worked all across the world, and I was able to pick his brains and get so much great information that I hope to share with you today.
Perfect. So I'm looking forward to it. I think I would love to be a cruise ship doctor. I think it sounds really cool. You have a set amount of patients, a set amount of work, and you get to travel a lot. And I can big him to travel.
Yeah.
But what I want to know is, how do you actually get into it? So because you need to do GP training to be GP, you need to do cardiology training to be a cardiologist. There's no cruise ship doctor training.
Yeah, I think the place to start is the question of what does the cruise doctor do? And so what training will they need for it? Because you've got a medical degree, which means that you're on the right path. But then what is the job of a cruise ship doctor?
Sip cocktails and look at the sea.
I mean, yes, you can do that whilst nobody's seeing the patients in the medical bay. I'm not saying that's what you should do. Yeah, you could if you want. So they are essentially a floating community of two separate types of patients. You have staff on a cruise ship, which is a huge number of staff, anywhere from the hundreds to thousands of staff on the big ships. And then you've got the patient populations, which can be anywhere from hundreds to, I believe one of the biggest is in the Caribbean, about 8,000 people that they have to look after. So in total, it's somewhere up to 8,000 to 10,000 people. And so you're not only looking after their pre-existing medical conditions, you're having to manage any of the medications that are having to go out. You're having to manage any outbreaks of sickness and quarantine that you might need to do, particularly relevant with COVID, which wrecked the cruising industry. Then the thing that everybody anticipates is the emergency stuff. So how do you manage the critical illnesses and what do you do? So in order to do all of those things, the best place training is to go through emergency medicine training pathway, going through your acute and critical skills training pathway.
I guess the point is that you're often one doctor, you're one trained person, and so you need to be able to manage an emergency and manage an airway.
Not always, but I think the key thing you mentioned there is about airway training, which is pivotal, because if somebody stops breathing, you have to be able to take over their airway and ventilate them on the cruise ship until you can evacuate them off the cruise ship to get to a hospital to get a definitive treatment for them if you can. That's why having that emergency medicine training is great. Having all the skills from a general practitioner is also fantastic, but you wouldn't be airway trained or have the potentially, maybe you were previously, but you don't have maybe as up-to-date airway training as the emergency medicine doctors. So that's really one of the key things into it. And the chap that I spoke to, the team that I spoke to, they started as paramedics, and then they trained in their home countries. They then trained as doctors, and then they went into emergency medicine and finally into a cruise ship doctor.
And so they have basically the skills of an emergency medicine doctor and also some of the skills of a GP to manage the chronic health problems. Do you have to finish? So for example, you're in the UK. Do you have to become a consultant before you can work on a cruise ship, or can you do it somewhere in between?
It's a really good question. You don't have to be a consultant to work as a cruise ship medic. You can be in your registrar training and you can apply to be the junior medic on the ship. So you said that you'll be working on your own. That's not always the case. And actually in most of the main larger cruise ships, it won't be the case. You'll be working in pairs quite often. So there'll be 2 doctors, there'll be a junior doctor, and there'll be a senior doctor. But that junior-senior doesn't necessarily mean consultant and registrar. It could be senior consultant and junior consultant. And then you will also, within your team, you'll also have potentially 2 nurses, maybe more on the bigger boats, maybe just 1 nurse on a smaller boat, to do all the critical skills that nurses bring to these situations, and also that they can do for this sort of community-type long-term disease for the patients. And then the thing that they've brought in just now, after COVID, is there must be an infection control healthcare professional, which is normally someone with a nursing background, to specifically manage the outbreaks and quarantine and infection control advice. All the cruise ships are expected to have that.
Okay, interesting. And it's news to me that they work in teams. I just imagined one guy with one room that was seeing sick people. So I was actually surprised when you said things like medical bay, and almost I imagined it a little bit like a tiny ward on the ship.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, there's a whole, so you head down to below the main decks and you'll get to the medical bay. And the medical bay is pretty much it's a mini emergency department. So inside an emergency bay, you'll have a wait room, you'll have the triaging desks where the nurses will initially triage, and then you've got the doctor's consultation rooms. In the doctor consultation rooms, they've got access to all sorts from a pharmacy. So you've got all the emergency medicine drugs, and you also have a lot of the long-term drugs that you might, the long-term condition drugs that you'll manage like in a normal community pharmacy. Next to that, you'll have an x-ray room. So you'll only be able to do plain film x-rays, but you won't be able to do anything like CT and MRI.
Who's doing those x-rays? Do you have to do those x-rays?
The nurses and doctors are able to conduct the x-rays, so they get the panels in the right place and then they're trained to work the x-ray machine. It's not normally as high-tech as the ones that you find in the other stationary ones that will be in a hospital, because it needs to be light enough to get on the boat and also maneuverable enough in loads of different situations. And the final part of it is they have a resus. They have a whole resuscitation bay, and in that resuscitation bay they've got a ventilator, they've got, like I said, all the emergency drugs and all the equipment that they need to be able to manage all the emergency situations that they can.
That made me think basically that in the UK there's radiographers whose job it is to conduct those, and we don't necessarily know how to do it. But I guess you can just get extra training to learn how to do it, to then do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to hit you with three big questions that we can address one at a time.
Sure.
How much do they get paid?
Yeah.
How hard is the work, and what do they actually do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
And how much do they actually get to travel?
Gotcha. So the first one I asked from a junior medical point. So I said, if I continue with emergency medicine training and I apply as a junior registrar, what would be an estimate of what I might get paid? And the estimate was $6,000 to $8,000 US a month to work on the cruise ship.
Oh. Where were you cruise shipping? Which part of the world?
So that's fairly good. So that is if you're cruise shipping in the Americas and the Caribbean. You can also, it's worldwide. The boats just continually move around the world and relocate. So as a doctor assigned to a boat, you might have to move with the boats.
So that's £60,000 to £80,000 a year.
Yeah. If you work the whole year. Now that, I think, is the next part of the question, wasn't it? How hard do they work? So when you're on, you work hard. And when you're off, you're not at work at all. So using a 2-doctor system, there will always be 1 doctor on call. So 1 doctor should always be on the ship at least. And what that means is that on call, they do 1 in 2 days or nights. So 1 doctor will be on for Monday, and they'll cover the phone and everything for 24 hours, all the emergencies overnight, and then the next day the next doctor will be, and there's no day off. A day when the boat is going, because the boats are let's say Sunday to Sunday. There's no off time for those doctors and nurses. They are on 7 days a week for the entire time that they're contracted for, and they will be doing 1 in 2 night shifts for the entire time that they're on. So they're working really hard. Now, their normal day will be structured by, they'll work a clinic from 8 until 1. So any patients that come through, and they'll book them into time slots. And then obviously any emergencies will come in as well, but they'll have 8 to 1 for clinic when there's no emergencies, and then they have a break to sort out any extra paperwork and referrals, because that's really complex, and then they go into the 4 to 7 clinic. So they're pretty much working from 8 in the morning till 7 p.m. at night as a minimum running morning and afternoon clinic alongside all the emergencies and giving all the phone advice to people who call up as well from the rooms.
That really doesn't sound easy. So you're almost doing a job similar to a GP where you've got a clinic in the morning and the afternoon, and then you're also on call in the night time that same night.
And you're running an emergency department at the same time. Yeah, it sounds pretty intense. So because of that, most doctors don't work the whole year. So most doctors, let's say they might be a doctor who is trained in Central America, but they want to work in North America. So they'll on a cruise ship in North America. So they'll fly up, they'll work on the cruise ship, and they might work for 4 months, maybe 6 months, maybe 8 months. And then let's say they work for 8 months, they'll do 8 months on, and then they'll take 4 months off. And when you're off, you're not contracted, so you're not getting paid anything. So there's no sick leave and annual leave entitlement at that point. You're just not on a contract and not getting paid.
That's pretty tough because you can have an annual wage, but you need that wage to carry over to give you leave to be off. To have to work to get paid doesn't make that wage quite worth it.
I don't think it might for maybe if you were working in the US, for example. The doctors in the US do get paid significantly more than that. But if you were trained in a country where the income for doctors was a lot less than that, then $6,000 to $8,000 as a junior, that's your first year in, is actually quite a lot. And you then are not working the full year. You've got 4 months off to be able to travel the area.
And I guess it's every other day, isn't it? So you're not working every single day. It's every other day, technically.
You're on call every other day. You are working every day.
Oh, so you're working every day. Oh, so I misunderstood. So one is on call, the other's working.
So they're both working and one is on call. Yeah. So they're both doing morning and afternoon clinics every day, 7 days a week. And one of them is also on the phone, taking all of the referrals and all the calls and managing the emergency stuff as well. But they're a team.
How much do they get to travel?
On their off time, they get to travel. So you take a contract for a certain amount of time, and then when you're off, you get to travel. When you're actually on the boat, it really works depending on who you work with. So if you're working with a colleague, let's say it's the senior is a junior system is working, and the senior says, I really need a break this afternoon. Well, then the junior one, if the senior feels that they're qualified to manage the boat on their own, might be able to say, yeah, I'm going to go off the boat and I'm going to go to the city for the afternoon when it's in port, or I just need the afternoon off. And they can decide amongst themselves because they really are a team that are looking after everyone on the boat.
See, because the feeling I got was a cruise ship moves around, it's docks at a lot of places. As a doctor on a cruise ship, you get to stop at these places, you get to get off the boat and see all these cool places. But actually, from the sounds of it, you are sort of still stuck to that boat. And the boat may be moving around, but you sort of,
100%.
You're not traveling as much.
It sounds amazing, doesn't it? Where you think I can cruise around, I'll just do a clinic here and there, see anybody if they're sick, do the exciting stuff. But really, it's not like that.
What about food and drink? Is that all paid for?
Food and drink is paid for, and your accommodation costs are paid for. So you don't have to pay for your food, you don't have to pay for your drink, and you have to pay for your accommodation.
So really, that £6,000 to £8,000 is paying back your student loan, and the rest of it's going in your pocket, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
So let me just wrap this up. Let's say I am an ED registrar, I'm a doctor training in emergency medicine, and I want to become a cruise ship doctor. How do you actually do it? How do you apply for it?
So the doctors are sent out via agencies. So you can apply to an agency, and that agency will then advertise different jobs that are given to them from the cruise ship companies. So you can be, normally if you want to be a doctor on the same boat because you get used to how the systems work, you get used to the staff that are working there, you get used to the facilities, so you're going to be assigned to that boat. But let's say that boat goes to somewhere you don't want to go to, or let's say they go to, you don't want to work the full year and only 8 months of the contract.
I just imagine this really racist person like, I don't want to go to that country.
That would be pretty cruel. I think what happens mostly is that the doctors and nurses will move and work, let's say again they work in North America, they'll then move and work there, but then they'll find a partner there, and at that point it's very difficult for them to go and spend 6 months of the year in Australia or cruising around Norway, for example. So that's what makes it quite difficult. But what they told me is there are nearly always vacancies in different places. Now I think the Caribbean is quite desirable, and parts of the Mediterranean quite desirable, and I think the smaller boats are more desirable because there's less of population, patient patient population and staff population that are on your boat, so your workload is a little less. But there's always vacancies. So if you are wanting to get into it, they said that it is very reasonable for people to get into it. And you only stay as a junior really for a year. After a year of cruise ship doctoring, you can become a senior.
But for that year, you'll have to be the doctor on a cruise ship going from Alaska to Antarctica.
Potentially. After talking about all of that, you said at the start of our chat, you think you'd really like to do it. Have I put you off?
You know what?
Or have I enticed you in?
I'm on the wrong training pathway anyway, but even if I wasn't, you'd absolutely put me off. It sounds like really hard work, and it sounds like the reason I'd want to do it is to travel around, but even that doesn't sound like it's worth it. Would you want to do it?
I don't think I would. I don't think I would, but I do think there are some benefits to having that ad hoc contract on, contract off, and being able to work and have a working visa in all these different countries. And I'm sure it's pretty exciting when things do happen, like critical injuries do happen and they have to helicopter people off. That is pretty difficult.
See, I think we are looking at it from different ways. You're thinking about when things do happen. I'm thinking about when things don't happen, being able to hang around a cruise ship.
You're thinking about work when you're not working.
To be honest, I think rather than being on a cruise ship as a doctor, I think basically I just want a cruise.
Yeah, maybe.
We were speaking about Australia earlier. If you are interested in Australia, we've got a whole series about becoming a doctor in Australia. That wraps up this video. Thanks for joining us, Kieran. If you're new, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.